Today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast contains explicit language and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ramp It Up podcast with your host, Ronell Sinuis.
Are you ready to ramp it up?
Ramp it up, ew!
Hey, yo, ramp it up, B.
Girl, ramp it up! Ramp it up!
The Ramp It Up podcast.
Hey, you need to ramp it up.
Ramp it up.
And on today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast, I have two guests joining me, and I know oftentimes I say special guests, but these gentlemen are coming from Neuralink, and Neuralink has been a bit of a whisper. They've been under the radar. It's a company started up by Elon Musk, and with some of the work that they're doing, I really wanted to bring them on to talk about what they have planned for some of us in the spinal cord injury community. So I'm going to introduce first Bliss Chapman. Bliss, say what's up to everybody.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me on the show.
Definitely a pleasure having you. Thanks for coming all the way from Cali. You're calling us from the West Coast. And joining Bliss is Fouzan Alam. Hopefully, I practiced saying his name a few times. Hopefully, I didn't mess it up this time.
Hello, everyone. It's really, really good to be here. Thank you for having us.
All right, my pleasure again, gentlemen. Both of you work for Neuralink. And as I said before, it's a company that's been a bit under the radar for a while, but there have been many whispers. Many people have been talking about Neuralink and some of the work you guys are doing. So just to kind of give a bit of a brief overview for the both of you guys, I have your bios. Thank you to Romina for sharing them. Fouzan is a biomedical engineer and ex-doctor working on technologies that improve people's lives and lower the barriers for access to care. His previous work includes an implantable sensor startup, a new brain scanning modality based on TMS and EEG, and low-cost, high-performance spinal fusion implants. He is currently at Neuralink on clinical data and operations. On the side, he is an angel investor, advises frontier tech startups, and runs a small product design studio. Now, as for Bliss, he is a lead software engineer at Neuralink. He gets very excited about anything related to his new puppy and how to turn brain signals into computer control. That is quite the difference in activities. Before Neuralink, Bliss worked at Apple as a machine learning engineer in the camera and photos group with the explicit goal of building experiences that make his mama cry happy tears. Bliss grew up dancing classical ballet in Central Illinois, where he was homeschooled alongside his 5 awesome siblings. Now, that means you and I have something in common. I also have 5 siblings. Where are you in the lineup?
Oh, I'm number 3. Yeah, I actually have a hobby of trying to guess for other people where are they in their sibling order. Do you mind if I take a guess? I'm guessing you're number 2.
Far from. I am 6.
Dang.
I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. I am, unfortunately, not anywhere close to the top. So that meant everyone was telling me what to do growing up. But I tell them, conversely, I'm the most important, the most loved, the most handsome of the group as well. So that works.
Yeah, you also get all the wisdom from the previous 5. You don't make any of the same mistakes, you know?
You watch them get in trouble and you just don't repeat the same mistakes. You learn to do them a little smarter, so I'll say. All right, so I've read both of your bios. They're both very technical and very, important, especially Fouzan. But I want to give both of you guys the opportunity to tell me a bit about yourselves individually. I guess we'll start with Bliss. Tell me a bit about yourself, your educational background, and of course, how you came to Neuralink.
Yeah. So I grew up in Central Illinois, and as Drew just discussed, I had a bunch of siblings. And it actually led me kind of strangely on a path into computer science. The story goes I was dancing classical ballet for about 10 years growing up, and I really, really enjoyed that. However, at some point, my feet basically stopped working pretty well and had to have foot surgery to chop out some bones and get things working down there properly again. And during that time, my older sister actually handed me a computer and sort of taught me the basics of computer programming. And that sort of led me on a journey into computer science and sort of the technical side of the work that I do now. And I ended up going to University of Illinois because it was sort of the neighboring university. And I studied computer science and statistics there because I was very, very interested in sort of the future of machine intelligence and actually building smart algorithms that can do useful things for people in the world. And during that time, a little closer, during that time, I actually got introduced to some of the work of Krishna Shenoy, who's sort of a leading academic researcher in the field of brain-computer interface. And his work was sort of the foundation of a lot of what Neuralink is doing now. So his work sort of pioneered the process of turning brain signal into control of external applications. So, for example, moving the cursor around on the screen or giving keyboard input and things like this. And so I read a lot of his papers throughout high school and college and remember just thinking, holy moly, this is not only incredibly cool sci-fi future, but actually has real-world application and can actually help a lot of folks who don't have access to the sort of computing systems around them in the same way that I do. And so I got very, very excited about this technology and really knew that I wanted to work on this in the long term. At that time, Neuralink wasn't sort of at the stage where they're looking for people who could turn sort of research into production. It was still a very early stage company at that time. So I ended up going to Apple, where I worked on a bunch of sort of machine learning applications in the camera and photos organization. So there's a lot of sort of computer vision and smart algorithms that look at not only the pixels that are coming into your camera, but also the actual photo library after you've sort of built up, huge massive photos that you and I probably take thousands of every year. And so there I built some pretty cool features that were really designed to help people relive their photos experiences and their memories. And then at some point, Neuralink got to the point where we were ready to go from sort of research mode to let's actually ship something to the real world. And that's when I got very interested because that's what I want to do. I want to turn these very advanced research applications into things that feel normal, things that can integrate into the daily lives of people and actually do some good. So I joined Neuralink now about 2 years ago and have been sort of working on the decoding side of this problem for a long time. So just to give you some context about Neuralink, Neuralink has sort of a goal of trying to build brain interfaces, so essentially an implant that reads out brain signal and converts it into control of the computing devices around you. And there's many different technical components of that I can go into in great detail throughout this conversation. But the part that I specifically work on, just to give you some background, is once you have brain signal, how do you convert that into cursor control or keyboard inputs? And so that's really what I spend my days working on now. And it is so fun.
All right, well, I guess you're the person
So
I
that's a
need
little
to
bit about
talk to because that was one of my questions. So when we get to that point, I definitely want to understand how that happens. And I just want to say, it was a big jump, I guess, from ballet to computer science. And I'm just going to take a swing, not to actually guess your age, but I'm assuming you're over 30 like myself. And, we've lived, am I wrong?
I'm 24.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did not guess that, especially from 5 siblings. See, I assumed. See, all right. Well, don't assume. Well, I was going to say, as far as growing up, it must be interesting living on the cusp of seeing what is and has been science fiction to you're literally making it reality now. And of course, there are skeptics, I being one of them, although I love technology, but who doesn't need a healthy amount of skepticism? But the reality is, we've lived in a great time to see what some of the great art authors and filmmakers talked about and imagined, and now you're literally hands-on making them come to life. So that must be amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's something that I'm glad you reminded me of it, because a lot of the work on a daily basis we do is just magical. And you kind of get lost in the weeds of the engineering a lot of time. And you don't appreciate sort of the step back view of, oh my gosh, here's a monkey playing video games with their mind, for example. And that's, it's really incredible to think about just from the philosophical point of view that, okay, a monkey can play video games. And then 2, they could do it without using their hands. Like, that's super crazy to just think about it all.
I actually just watched that video again today, just before when I was preparing for the interview. And I was just like, yeah, first of all, the fact that you taught the monkey how to play, and then now they're doing it hands-free. So that is amazing. And I can't wait because I've been wanting to get back into gaming so badly. So once that is available, I cannot wait. To shift a bit to Fouzan and tell me a bit about yourself, especially It says you used to be a doctor, a physician. So tell me a bit about yourself and then your journey to Neuralink.
Yeah, so I say ex-doctor because I went through the entire medical school process and then decided I really didn't want to practice medicine, didn't do residency, and instead joined the brain imaging startup that I was building at the time. That startup was a summer project that turned into a thing because we realized what we were building was really useful. So what we did there was transcranial magnetic stimulation is a way to you can use a magnetic pulse to actually reach in and fire neurons in the brain, right? So neurons are the brain cells. And because this is a thing that exists, you can target a region in the brain, activate it from outside of the head, completely non-invasively. And you can use the signal generated there and EEG, which is the scan they do where they look at brainwaves by putting little electrodes on your head. You can actually look at the signal moving through different brain regions and evaluate the regions of the brain and the pathways that connect them. And this is very useful for looking at impairment that might result from stroke or other things like that. And so this was something that we started building in a lab and then realized, oh wait, this is medically useful. So we should turn this into a company. So that's why I left medical school. And I think I never really knew what I wanted to do. Because I started just by studying engineering and then built a sensor company there, then did medicine, then decided to leave medicine and go into biotech startups. And at some point along the way, something clicked. It was the theme of everything I was building was wanting to make people's lives better, regardless of where I was working or what I was doing. And that, eventually brought me to Neuralink, where it was I wanted to be surrounded by a team of people who shared that goal. And want to be able to do this at a scale that wasn't possible with smaller startups that I had built or worked on. And I think the other really interesting thing is nothing I learned felt like it was wasted, because all the context that I have from previous work today applies to everything we do. And Bliss and I were just chatting about one of the remarkable things about this company is the number of incredibly talented people we have across so many teams, but then every team is 5 to 6 people, and you kind of think about it, it's these are 5 of the experts in this one region, for example, analog chip design or brain computer interfaces or machine learning, and it's kind of amazing to be able to talk to all of them and also appreciate and understand a bunch of what they do. So
I'll say this:
truly blessed.
You spoke to me because I think we live in a world where people expect coming out of high school or early years of college for you to know what you're going to do, just straight out. And sometimes you end up doing years worth, especially if you're in med school, and realize, well, this direction is not for me. And then, as you said, you did engineering, and it led you what you are. So what's beautiful is both of them became the framework for the work that you're doing now. And coming from similar, I wasn't sure where I was going, and then found myself now doing work with United Spinal and hosting the podcast. So sometimes just your past experiences and education are just leading you towards, not necessarily the passion projects, as everyone says, but where you are meant to be. And here you are working, like you said, to help others in one capacity or another.
Yeah, and life is a journey. It's okay to just kind of not know where you are at the moment. Just keep working towards the things that you care about.
It's more fun that way.
Yeah.
We barely started. You guys are giving great advice to the listeners already. So now, what role do you actually play right now with Neuralink, Fouzan?
Yeah, so I'm on Neuralink's clinical team. We're the team that works on human trials. We work on patient registry. We work on things that are super important in the process of taking the science project, as Bliss was referring to, and translating it into a product we can actually provide to the world. And a huge part of that process is before you can put something out there, you really need to test it. And so we do a lot of testing on the benchtop. We do a lot of animal study testing. For example, the monkey videos you were watching earlier. But at some point, like, a person has to try this out, and we have to show that this works for a real person. And that's, like, the next step. And so that's what our team has been working on.
So now, in as plain English as possible, as much of a tech dad as I am, I'm not an engineer, nor are some of my listeners, explain exactly what phase Neuralink is on as far as the product that they're trying to get tested between both you and Bliss.
Sure. So if you broadly look at, like, what biomedical companies have to do, the benchtop testing is everything that you do, like, sort of testing the components and individual pieces of a thing. When you build the thing, you do animal studies to make sure that it is safe and show that it works in animal models. Then you work on human trials. And once you launch human trials, like, you have to start with very small safety studies and then eventually move to, like, here's a study that tests how well this works. So first you prove safety, then you show that it works. And then you apply to various regulatory organizations to allow you to sell the device. And we are currently working on human trials. So
now, after speaking with Ramina, she essentially explained to me that the product that you're working on currently is the implant. And the goal of the implant is to allow folks like myself who have some mobility issues. I am a C4, C5 level quad, so I don't have full arm, hand, wrist, and finger functionality. I'm actually using the head mouse nano to control my laptop. So essentially, the idea is to bypass having these software and hardware devices that are external and to implant it into my brain so I can use these devices. So theoretically, and I guess I'll ask Bliss because we're going to talk about how those thoughts are converted into actions for the actual device. How, best case scenario, how is it supposed to work, and explain a bit of how, I guess, it works.
Yeah, this is my literally favorite topic in the whole world. So aside from maybe my puppy. So let's start with the goal. So the goal of the first generation Neuralink device is to enable a user with paralysis to control the computer as well as I can. And by I mean literally me. And that means control the computer as fast as I can with all the same functionality that I have when I'm using my muscles to interact with my computer, and at the same level of reliability that I have when I'm using my computer. I want to be very, very clear. These are aspirations, and we have not yet achieved this, although we have made very good progress towards this level of performance. So the way this works is you stick electrodes in the brain. You can think of electrodes as, since you're a podcaster, microphones, little microphones that listen to cells in the brain. And these cells in the brain represent everything that makes you you. Your intentions, your desires, what you want to have for lunch that day, etc. And the specific area we're sticking these microphones in, these electrodes, is the motor cortex. And in the motor cortex, there's some information content that represents what you intend to do with the muscles in your body. So how do you want to hold your hand? Do you want to squeeze your fist? Do you want to move your arm to the right, to the left, etc.? And it turns out that in the statistics of how these cells fire, meaning how they behave and how you can listen to them from the electrodes, you can actually decode or convert those signals into what the user is trying to do. For example, do you want the cursor to move to the right, to the left, to click and hold, etc.? And it actually is surprisingly straightforward. This sounds way more magical than it really is.
And so you saw the skepticism on my face there because, I'm just going to make it plain. I'm looking at my screen and I'm telling my head and my brain move to the left. So the arrow is moving to the left so I can mute my microphone here on Zoom. You're telling me those electrodes are able to record those impulses and then translate them, say, hey, this is what he wants to do. And then, of course, as you said, best case scenario, transmit that to the device and then replicate that exactly.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're trying to do. And it's actually the way it would work for someone with paralysis or some form of tetraplegia would be you'd actually imagine a muscle movement. So you'd actually imagine, for example, moving your arm to the right or squeezing your hand to click. And the neurons that encode that in your brain are still present after an accident or after you get paralyzed. And so we're essentially just reusing those same signals that are already there and remapping them to computer applications that are, useful for you. And so you can imagine that we can build up sort of a library of things that we can decode well from your brain. For example, maybe squeezing your right fist, moving your hand to the right, to the left, pointing with a finger, whatever imagined movement we happen to have a good signal for from the electrodes that we stuck in your brain. And then you can choose how to map those to the computer control applications you're interested in.
Okay, it just blew my mind a bit. So even after those parts,
we actually don't like that phrase here. Blowing a mind is not good.
Yeah, I know. Okay, no, yes, especially now how we're talking about it right now. No. So even after those particular impulses are recorded, I could then even change, like remap in my mind, I'm saying open my hand, but opening my hand can be assigned to a different task based on, okay.
Yes.
Yep.
And, one of the ways we think about this is the mental model you build for controlling your device should be as intuitive as possible. And allowing someone to remap allows you to kind of customize it to your own needs. Maybe there's an application you want to use that has very specific controls. Maybe, for example, you actually want, clenching your right fist to mute and unmute, for example, while recording. And that just kind of takes that burden away from like having to do it manually every time. Things like that. Customization is important.
Okay.
And what you'll see over...
Good. It's good.
What you'll see over time as this technology progresses is we'll be able to decode more and more things reliably. So not just your right hand, but also your left hand. Also, maybe eventually your big toe, or exactly, higher order things that you want to do with your computing system. And so over time, you'll see the reliability increase, the number of functions that you can actually output increase, and the speed at which you can use them to control fluidly the computer applications you're interested in also grow.
Yeah.
Now,
all very important for gaming.
Exactly. Okay.
Yes.
See, we're gonna actually get there because I want to talk about gaming and anime, but that's the next phase. So, watching the videos when they talked about the pigs and the monkeys, one thing they really did express is the difference in the higher function that we have as humans. Our brains, we tend to do 2, 3, 4, 5 things at the same time. So I could be telling my hand, "Hey, pick up the cup," but at the same time, I'm singing a song in my head and walking. So you're doing 3, 4, 5 different activities all at the same time. How are these electrodes differentiating all of these commands and actions happening simultaneously? Just because, again, while I'm moving my mouse around here, I'm thinking of what I'm saying to you, but I'm thinking about the next question. So how is it not getting tripped up or confusing all of the signals being sent to it at the same time?
Oh, this is a super good question. Let me maybe back up just 2 steps. So you mentioned monkeys and how we sort of confirm that our algorithms and our device work well in animals. I want to mention just briefly that work is very much confirmatory. If we didn't have to work with animals, we really wouldn't want to. We just view that as sort of the right thing to do before you try it with a human, right? Like if there's any way to avoid testing with an animal, you obviously want to move that work to benchtop. And there's just sort of good engineering reasons why that's the right thing to do. It's just much simpler and faster to test something on benchtop than it is to test in an animal, aside from just the moral implication of using an animal. Okay, so now that point aside, how can you start to differentiate in a human who's maybe thinking about 10 or 100 or different things at once, what they actually intend to do with their cursor, for example? So this is getting very deep now into the weeds of how do you actually decode brain activity reliably day to day. And one very interesting property about the brain is that the underlying signal representation that we actually get out of the brain sort of evolves through time. So you might see that in one day, the signal has certain statistical properties, and then on the next day, those properties have actually shifted in some way that makes it challenging to decode from those same signals. And what's very interesting, to your point about humans versus monkeys, for example, is that in humans, it appears to be, based on sort of limited academic work in this field, that sort of non-stationarity, that change in the statistics of neural activity is actually higher. So there's more change through time in human brain than in monkey brain. Now, this is like not very well understood phenomena. The good news is that from the engineering point of view, there's many things you can do to keep a decoder up to date as that distribution changes, as the brain activity evolves. So regardless of whether or not you understand deeply why that's happening, there's still engineering techniques you can apply to sort of work around the problem and make sure that the user experience is still high quality.
Okay.
And I guess so really quick to add to that, one of the ways we differentiate from what signals are happening is broadly brain regions are sort of representative of certain functions. So for example, if you look at sort of the area above your ear and all the way around the head to the other side of the ear, that region's the motor cortex. So that's where a lot of your movement intent is encoded. Whereas there's towards the front of the head and to almost the forehead area, there's a lot more personality and reasoning stuff going on. Visual stuff actually happens in the back of the brain, weirdly enough, as the eyeballs are in the front, but the nerves cross under the brain and sort of towards the back. So by choosing the regions we implant, we can broadly access certain functional areas. And then once we're there, everything Bliss said applies of making sure we can actually decode the signal and look out for how the brain is changing. And it's a very key part of functionality.
One other thing I'll just mention here is that we're sort of piggybacking on the shoulders of many giants, I would say. So one are the sort of neuroscientists that have worked for years to try to understand how the brain represents information. And the other big group that we're piggybacking off of are the sort of Silicon Valley companies that work on smartphone technology or camera technology or whatever smart technology used today that has to learn how to turn complex signals into useful things. So as advances in sort of machine learning move forward, that lifts everyone up, including our ability to decode from the brain. So we're sort of piggybacking not only on the work of decades of experimental neuroscience at places like Stanford, for example, but also the machine learning work happening in industry, both here in Silicon Valley and around the world.
All right. Now, I'm not sure if you guys know this about me, but I'm a big Japanese anime fan. I am a comic book geek. I love video games, and I love sci-fi. And if you have any interest in any of those areas, we've all seen the movies or shows or some inference where they're the robots are going to take over. I mean, let's be real. And it's funny because when I first connected with Romina, I spoke to her. I said, I had my injury late in 2016. And in 2018, a movie called Upgrade came out. Exactly what you guys are doing. Okay, in fact, part of my research, I went and rewatched the movie again before our conversation. And first thought is, cool, I don't mind being a cyborg. Why not? You get superpowers, you can do all sorts of crazy things. But of course, that skeptical side of it. Yeah, it's great seeing all the things we saw as kids that were sci-fi becoming into reality. But I know there are a lot of moral and ethical questions as far as how far are we going? What are some of your, I don't want to say personal, but your perspectives on those? And we'll go a little bit further from there.
Oh, I love this question so much. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the main reasons I'm here at Neuralink. I think this is an extremely important question to get right. But maybe let me separate just for a moment sort of the short term from the long term, because I think there's maybe different considerations at each. In the short term, I think the work Neuralink is doing is really aimed at trying to help folks that have various neurological disorders. So folks with tetraplegia, if you have vision loss, for example, and even some of the longer term work we want to do in the next decade is to try to reanimate bodies to actually, not just read out brain activity, but also stimulate electrical current back into the body to, reanimate limbs that you maybe don't have access to now. I want to be clear, that's longer term than the computer control work we're doing now, but it's still in the short term of Neuralink as a company. And so I think in that phase of Neuralink, the work we're doing, while very technologically sophisticated, is really straightforwardly aimed at good things, almost indisputably, just trying to help people. In the long-term future of Neuralink, really from Elon's point of view, is to essentially build a generalized input-output system to the human nervous system. And obviously there's many short-term applications of this, which we've talked about so far in this podcast. But the long-term vision of that is to eventually merge with advanced artificial intelligence systems. And in some ways, the way Elon likes to phrase this is we're already doing this with our phone. You already have a phone in front of you that you're interacting with. And it's really just slowed down by the process of you typing into it with your thumbs. But if you're anything like me, you've probably had the experience before of you typing into this tiny little phone with your thumbs and realizing it actually knows a lot more than you do. And you're just bandwidth limited in how you can talk to it with these little thumbs that have to type like this to get out information. And so the sort of long-term view of Neuralink is to try to increase that bandwidth between computing systems around us that continue to get smarter and smarter, and humans, which, while progressing, are maybe not progressing at the same rate as the technology around us. So that's really the long-term view of Neuralink. And I'm happy to talk about all the moral and ethical considerations of that more sci-fi future. But I really want to emphasize that that's the long term. It's very far away from the focus of the company now, which is to try to help people which have very serious neurological disorders.
Which is exactly how at least 3 of my favorite animes start. Well, hey, just playing devil's advocate, because again, that's how most technology starts. It starts with the want to do better, to help others, and then as it progresses, where is that line? Who decides? Because I remember listening to part of his interview Elon's interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, essentially saying at some point we're going to become cyborgs, because if that's essentially what it is, we're having mechanical or electronic implants, interacting and with technology in that sense, and especially with AI, especially with all that's going on right now, we're essentially cyborgs. And again, I'm not against it. I'm not 100% for it yet, because as a person with quadriplegia, the potential is amazing. For one, the hands-free control of everything, and then the potential of reanimating limbs sounds amazing. But then, are you telling me in 20 years, are we replacing body parts then with other? So that's where I know some of the skepticism comes from. And again, Fouzan, with a little bit of your med school background, how does that then does that offer any issues where it comes physiologically, or are there any questions as far as compatibility with the body and that side of the ethical dilemma?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to think about this. So one is definitely like the emphasis is restoring humanity and trying to what makes us human is our ability to think, to express ourselves, to feel, and everything else. And if you think about restoring someone's humanity, it really comes down to giving them the ability to express themselves in the most accurate way possible. So starting with we can now control external devices better. That means you can express yourself better in whatever art medium you have or whatever work you do. And so I think that's where we start. Then there's a bunch of other people who have lots of different impairments. The things that we're looking for, the items we or the indications, as we call them, that the patient registry is addressing, right? So, tetraplegia, paraplegia, but also vision loss, hearing impairments, speech impairments, depression and mood and other things. There's all these things that plague humanity that we can maybe alleviate or make it a little bit better or restore the functionality of. And I think that's generally broadly good. And I think that's something we can all agree on. Your question of where do we go from there? I think with most technologies, unless there's a real benefit to humans, we tend to not kind of go for them. Right? Smartphones caught on because they were much of what your laptop could do, but really convenient. They could fit in your pocket. You could carry them everywhere. They always had a data connection. And I think as we've gotten to smaller and smaller devices that we're constantly with, there's also been a bit of a loss of humanity in the sense that we're so attached to our devices that we don't really interact with one another as much as we could. And I think the other side of this is when the technology is a part of you, it sort of unlocks just more face-to-face interaction and allows you to kind of go back to just reconnecting with one another. And, if in the middle of a conversation, I want to look up that movie you just mentioned to me, I could just do that really quickly in my head and grab the information and then maybe return to that conversation and be present to the moment. And so I think the future of augmentation really isn't one where we are disconnected from one another, but more a future where we are more connected to one another as the technology sort of steps out of the way. And Walt Mossberg, who writes a lot about tech, in one of his last columns mentioned that in the future technology would become more and more invisible, and I think we're trending in that direction. And as it comes to augmenting our abilities, I think humans will tend to do this only in ways that are clearly useful. And maybe that means, for a photographer, being able to see what their camera sees directly, or maybe see more colors than they could see with their own eyes. Like we're thinking future use cases. But that doesn't mean that we take away what makes us human. I think that as we broaden our experiences and abilities to perceive, we'll find more ways to connect with one another. And I think that a huge part of what we do here and the discussions we have and everyone we work with is that there's a clear understanding that we have to be good stewards of this technology, that we cannot just build terrible things and unleash them upon the world, that we have to really be intentional about how we're making what we make, who's involved in it. And a really good example of that is we have a consumer advisory board where we always are talking to individuals with spinal cord injury, various levels of impairment, because I firmly believe that, and this is, I think, a view broadly shared by the company, that you cannot build technology for a group of individuals without talking to them and understanding what their needs are and really connecting with them at a human-to-human level and hearing what they struggle with every day and then being able to say, yes, we can help with that. And I think that that's something the company will do going forward, no matter what we do.
Yeah, maybe just to add another point to that, on the topic of building for a community that we don't ourselves, live in, I think conversations like this are extremely important to make sure that we're grounded in the real problems that are in front of us, and that we're building technology that incorporates into the fundamental building blocks components that will actually help the target audience. And this goes for the long term as well as the short term. So, for example, one of the more complicated, gnarly ethical, I think, conversations you could have about neurotechnology in 5, 10, 20 years is around privacy, around making sure that your brain data is only used for use cases that you are, happy with or that you desire. And this is actually fundamentally a technological problem of how do you make sure, for example, that the neural data never leaves the implant, or that only the things that actually need to leave the implant are relevant for controlling the computer applications around you, for example, are sent out, and the actual private details of your brain data remains on the device. So there's lots of subtle, 1,000 small technical decisions that go into building a product, and those decisions should be made with an informed sort of understanding of the community and about what a good future for neurotechnology looks like.
I'm actually glad both of you mentioned those two things as far as the advisory board and the privacy, because I was definitely going to go into that. I was going to mention one more thing as far as playing the devil's advocate, because I do a lot of disability advocacy and training, and a portion of it are as far as the models that disability is viewed under between the medical and the social models. And the medical model being that there's something wrong with the individual and it needs to be fixed. Whereas in contrast, of course, that's a very truncated version of it, and the social model is there's something wrong with society, and society should be made more accessible. And I'm quite sure, if not already, you guys are going to run into many groups and individuals that are going to argue that you're looking at it through the medical model lens, that you're looking at it at the individual who has a problem and it needs to be fixed versus it being their identity. I'm a blind person. I'm a deaf person. I'm a wheelchair user. And many people find pride or part of their identity and they don't need it to be fixed. Whereas this can be looked at through that medical model as, okay, hey, we're creating a product to fix people. How, and now, again, I don't argue for or against either model, but how would you, if at all, counter that claim if that is what you guys are facing at some point?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the way I think of this is it's up to us to listen to these communities and create something that truly solves a need they have. And then it is up to the communities and the individuals within to decide if they either agree with what we are presenting as a solution or as a way to address their problem or as a thing that they can use to extend themselves in a particular direction or a way. And we don't so much see it as like necessarily restoring lost functionality. We see it as like, here's a product with which you can express yourself better. And whatever that form of expression may be and whatever level of control you want is something we work towards. And the frustrations highlighted by the community are the things we focus on, because ultimately, like, if, those frustrations are expressed because people have a need and not because they don't feel complete or don't feel like themselves. And so if you can address those frustrations, you can like lower the barrier to a person expressing themselves and being who they want to be in the way that they want to express themselves. I think that's generally useful. And also I think it kind of sidesteps the problem, because I think with both models, like, while they oppose one another, I think in different ways they both apply.
Yes.
And they both also like clearly matter. Like, if society completely ignored being more accessible for individuals, like, that is generally terrible. And if we just saw people who have a particular disability or a particular injury, or identify as quadriplegic or tetraplegic or potentially like blind or deaf, like, just because they identify that way, like, doesn't mean we should think of them as like broken or less whole or less able to do things. Like, I think everyone is pretty incredibly able, and the mind is a beautiful vehicle that kind of hosts everything we are and everything we can be. And all we're trying to do is give that mind like another avenue to express itself.
I'm actually very glad you responded to it that way, because that's the approach I take as far as when I'm doing my trainings. It's not that one particular model is the right way or the wrong way. I think all are necessary, as far as neither of them by themselves are the correct way, because, again, we're all on different points in our lives. We're all thinking differently, the whole spectrum idea. So I think pieces of all of the different models are necessary, because the reality is, I guess, if you're a clinician, your job is to fix a problem, to cure a disease, to offer remedies for an issue. Whereas if you work in the social space, your idea, they're different. So I really did want to see your perspective on that. Now, I don't know if either of you guys are anime fans, either of you?
Not so much on my side, but mainly due to lack of exposure. Not anything against anime.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about
I do watch some anime at times.
All right, so we're going to
maybe
play
about 30% of what I watch.
We're going to play with the future a little bit, because, with the virtual reality that came about in the last few years and where we're going now, even with, again, the monkey being able to play hands-free, there's a concept in some of the anime called full dive, as far as in gaming. And I feel like even with this, we're just another step away from it. Because if you're telling me I am now allowed, I'm technically in the game, quote unquote, with virtual reality, and then I'm not controlling it with my mind, then how far are we from the concept of full dive?
Yeah, this is a good question. There's a blogger I read who one time wrote, when that's been achieved, when you can order a steak in virtual reality and actually, taste and smell
exactly.
it. And so I think that's in my view, still some number of years away. But I agree that a lot of the fundamental building blocks for this are happening in neural engineering today. So if that's a concept you're super excited about or motivated by,
oh yeah,
I think this is on
their favorite video game, being their favorite character, and then again, from a more personal point of view, you're talking to someone who has lost physical ability from being able to play sports and do some things I enjoyed. So imagine being able to do so, and then my brain thinking I'm physically doing it in the game. So it again, even there are other, based on the shows that I've watched, but there are other ethical issues as well. But being able to full dive and have those physical experiences and sensations that one may have lost because of illness or injury, I think that is not necessarily the next logical step as far as gaming. Oh, definitely, that would definitely be the next step.
You must be better at video games than I am. I mostly play first-person shooters, and I'm not very good.
Oh, okay,
so this is not the kind of full dive experience I'm looking forward to.
We already mentioned the differences in our ages. I'm talking about Nintendo's Duck Hunt from back in the day. So we've been doing this shooting thing for a long time. So now, I do want to get to the patient registry, but I wanted to talk about something that, again, as a person with a spinal cord injury, I deal with on a regular basis, and this is more of, I guess, a logical possible block. that Neuralink may have to deal with. Funding. Let's be real. We get to the point, fast forward, human trials are successful. It works. It's doing exactly what the company and Elon Musk has envisioned it to do. Why would I, who literally has to fight the insurance to get a brand new wheelchair, to get the healthcare coverage I need, home health aid, things of that nature, fight for this now implant? And I'm assuming hopefully insurance would try, or at least, that would be an avenue to look for funding it, when I can purchase a head mouse nano or use the Smile software or voice control, which are now essentially built into most devices, which are, one, non-invasive, two, I'm sure the funding is going to be some difference between $1,000 for this product and, surgery. Why would I put myself through that when there are these others, especially with my Alexa, I have to whisper or she'll hear me. But some of these other voice controlled devices that are seemingly a lot easier. Why would I go towards the Neuralink?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question, and this is something that we've had discussions about internally as well. So there's a couple of ways to think of this. So one is the setup and the tools and the assistive devices you have around you are broadly available, and they are attached to things around your house, things around your desk, things around your wheelchair. But not all of them can come with you. Not all of them can interface with other devices. And one of the things that we're thinking about with this is because it's a part of you, it goes everywhere you go. And as we think about the things we could do with it, one of them is the more broadly it's able to interface with other things, the more useful it could be, even in the broader world. So one part of the appeal is this is a tool you could take with yourself anywhere in the world that you go. And so that can be incredibly useful in several ways. And you might argue, well, yeah, but there's tools I can do that with today. And I think that's true up to a point. But then the refinement or the it's kind of a combination of the accuracy, the refinement of what this can do, the configurability, the customizability, the broad ability to interface with many things, that all together in one package should hopefully replace most of and also be a better experience versus other assistive tools. So that's one way to think of it. The other thing is there's also a clear value argument that we're trying to make in terms of one of the things Elon has talked about a bit is we really are trying to make this as affordable as a smartphone. And this is really hard to do, but it involves many things. So one of which is making sure the surgery scales, making sure the surgery is cheaper and more accessible, making sure the device itself is reasonable in terms of cost at scale. And all these things, to solve all these problems broadly, requires doing a ton of stuff in-house, because it's not as simple as assembling stuff that's off the shelf and putting something together, because then everyone else's costs and margins that add up on all those things would end up in the final device cost. And that's not great. So making this smartphone level or laptop level of affordability is a huge goal of ours, and is something that we are continuing to strive to as a company. And I think that between that sort of expected price target or goal price target and the broad usability of it, I think you can argue that not only would it be hopefully reasonable, but also broadly do enough and be much cheaper than the sum of other assistive tools. And I think that's the true value proposition of something like this. And again, as Bliss was saying earlier, these are goals we're striving towards, that we're still very much in the middle of working on. But we care so much about this, because you can build the best stuff in the world, but if no one can afford it, it's kind of a moot point.
And I'll say that again from having the literal firsthand experience of, okay, you see a product and it sounds great, but if you're on Social Security or you're limited income, it's not going to do anything for me. And as you said, okay, so I'll play the pros and cons game with you. The pro being, okay, so I could leave with my implant, I can connect to another smart device outside of my home, etc. Can control these things. And the pro to that is there's nothing worse than now that I have my setup at home, it's perfect, and I'm going to a friend's house, or if I'm unfortunately hospitalized for a day. So now all of my independence is now gone. All the functionality and the things I now have are gone. And again, being able to, like, I spoke with a young man yesterday who's getting ready to go to college in the fall, and he's a quad as well, and he has his setup nice at home. And he's like, well, now we have to essentially purchase everything all over again to put in the dorm. So of course, in the end, if you're able to sum up the price of, less than my whole setup, that would be great. But then again, having that access is also a little scary, as we talked about the privacy, thinking about your phone right now and connecting to anyone's network if you're out and about, or, before when they were talking about data mining, if you connect to a store or the mall's Wi-Fi, now they essentially have your information. Wouldn't we be putting ourselves in that same position, connecting to all of these other devices? And then it's directly in your brain, so it's a little scary as well.
Yeah, maybe just to expand briefly on the question to make sure I'm answering the right thing.
So, you're talking about a scenario where you're the pro and con of having that device. So the pro would be the usability and the mobility of it. But then again, the con would be, are you now opening yourself up to the risk of not necessarily data mining, but connecting to all of these outside devices? Because we're hearing every day that you can't connect your phone to any device anymore because someone might be, doing things like that or stealing your information. So are you now putting your implant at that same risk because it could connect to all these other devices outside?
I see. Yeah, so maybe a couple of thoughts on this. Starting from the most maybe obvious fact, but worth stating, is that no one is ever forced to get an implant. So there's always the option of just choosing not to get one. And what that means for a company like Neuralink is we need to build a product that's compelling enough, that works in the way that just feels magical, that somebody wants to get that product. And so all these things you mentioned are, I think, one component or one dimension of the sort of user experience that you have to solve to get to the point where it's compelling enough for someone to choose or to really want it. In the same way that, I as a kid really wanted an iPhone for the first time. Like you want that level of experience, the thing that just feels magical when you start using it for the first time, that people would advocate for before you try to take this kind of thing to scale. So I think every one of the concerns you just mentioned is completely valid, and part of the engineering process of the next years of development will be to solve and build a user experience that's compelling enough for folks like yourself or others in the spinal cord injury community that is basically going to convince others that they also want that thing. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't solve one dimension of this, then people will choose not to get your product.
Yeah.
Like I said, just playing devil's advocate and all this science makes it in my mind. It makes it a little skeptical. So now I really want to talk now. You mentioned the consumer board, the advisory board, and of course the patient registry. So tell us a bit about how you've been speaking with members of the spinal cord injury community. What impact do they have on the processes, and of course the patient registry?
Sure. So when we work with our consumer advisory boards, so they're paid members of Neuralink staff, and we work with them quite closely to not only discuss features we're building, but actively involving them in that process, sharing developments with them, getting feedback on actual designs, prototypes. We'll literally put prototypes in front of them and say, how does this look? Is this comfortable? What does this feel like? What's your impression of this feature? How could we make this better? Where should the wheelchair mount go on this thing? These kinds of things, because they matter. They're just little details that you have to get right, so that these products are a delight to use. And what's really important about that is this is always an ongoing conversation. We are always having this we're always having these discussions. We're always iterating very quickly. Every bit of feedback gets incorporated into the next revision, and then we share that again and say, okay, is this better? Do we think this is the right approach? And sometimes we try different things, and sometimes the answer is, oh, actually, all three options are great. Let's make it configurable. Or this is clearly the better choice. Let's do this. And this is super important for the user experience. So that's like a lot of what we do with Consumer Advisory Board, and they are often like helping us also better understand the challenges faced and the frustrations that people have with current assistive devices, and sort of like the most like salient problems and where we could be most effective. Where that like then leads to is, patient registry is an extension of us building and working with the community, in the very sense that the whole point of this registry is to start to gather a list of interested individuals who express that they want to potentially be part of any future Neuralink clinical trial. And the important thing for this is we want this to speak to indications we're looking at solving in the future. And so, we've opened up the registry for all 5 indications and for all future trials. And the idea being, you sign up for the registry, you answer the like personal and health information questionnaires. And then also like some of the questions we have about, what are you looking for? Quite literally, like, it would be life-changing if we could do blank, right? Like, why is that the, question we ask it? And it's like, we want to understand broadly as a community, like what everyone's needs are, especially across like different types of injuries or different types of disabilities. And then also like, because we know these individuals are interested, if they're eligible for future clinical trials, we can reach out to them and say, hey, would you like to be screened for this study in the future when that study launches? And this is like our way of kind of gathering all this information in one place. And then also like one of the pieces of feedback we got about a year and a half ago was, hey, like you guys are doing great stuff, but like we don't really hear about it. And also like, I don't know where to go. Like, I don't know where to sign up. Like, how do I be part of this? And patient registry tries to answer all of those concerns, while also being like the one place we can point people to and say, we're working on this stuff in the future. When those trials are ready to go, we can actually like reach out to you and say, hey, would you like to be screened for this study? And also then like, it's a place where we can gather broader community feedback of like, what are the features that you're looking for? What are the like problems in your life that we can solve? And like truly, anyone who has like, quadriplegia, paraplegia, vision loss, hearing loss, or like inability to speak, we invite them to participate in the registry. Like, jump onto the website, take a look at that consent form, read it, and like, fill out the registry questionnaire and everything. And then we can reach out to those individuals if they would like to screen into one of the studies in the future.
Actually, that's what I was going to ask you as far as who was welcome to be a part of it. Now, when we talk about people with paralysis, are we speaking only about traumatic injuries or people with disorders like spinal bifida, or who were as a result of surgery, different things like that, or stroke? Or is it just paralysis on a broad spectrum?
Paralysis on a broad spectrum. I think like what we're working on, we're hoping to solve a lot of those problems for many of the like reasons for injury or causes of injury. And, the broader approach, I think, is it makes more sense because it's like, as long as the modality of injury is that like the brain is still intact, and the brain is still able to like do what it needs to do, there's a useful signal there that we can like tap into and help like restore some of that functionality. So,
well, okay. So again, a lot of times with spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries do come as well. So will that cause some challenges when it comes to applying the Neuralink in the future? Or are we looking towards people who also have TBIs to study or, for the patient registry? Or are we just not there yet?
So that's a very hard question to answer without human data, right? Like this is one of those things that we are still exploring. But that's why we want this to be broad. So, any quadriplegia, any paraplegia, and then vision loss, hearing loss, inability to speak, like we want those people to apply, and then we'll be evaluating as we like do more work to figure out like what the right fit is. But we're, I guess like, I think the way to think of it is we start broad and then we like try and make sure that it works for as many people as we can have it work for.
No, I understand. Like I've participated in other trials and other surveys. Nothing invasive. I've always steered away from invasive or pharmaceutical trials. So do we have any idea or any trials that are out as of yet? Or is this just a register for the future ones?
So this is a registry for future trials. We are in conversations with the FDA right now. We're just working very closely with them. But I can't speak to like that right now specifically just because it's an in-progress thing that's like that we're working closely with the FDA on. When any future clinical trials launch, we will reach out to individuals who have signed up on the patient registry.
Okay. And as far as the advisory board, how does one become a part of the advisory board or be invited? Are they currently expanding right now?
So we are looking to expand the consumer advisory board, as we generally are at all times. Generally, this is something where some of the consumer advisory board individuals have come to us through like job applications. Others we've reached out to and invited because we've seen some of the work they're doing in the community, and we want to talk to them specifically and get their insights. This is a thing that we continue to build, and it will remain a focus for us.
Like influential podcasters in the community, people like that. Throwing that out there. And I know our time is coming to a close. And there were so many other questions I had. I think one that I've come across many times, I think I could squeeze it in before our time is up, is why invasive? Why not electrodes on the side of your head or a little silver dot or just like an earpiece or something that you can communicate through? Why must it be an implant?
So this is I think a two-part question. So I guess on the neuroscience side, or like on the brain side, it's like your brain has like 80 billion neurons.
Cortical neurons.
Yeah, close to, yeah. It's between like 80 and 100 and 110?
So it's something of this order, yeah.
Yeah. And so like you have this sort of like, you have this very fine architecture, and it's just like those neurons are like connected to like many cells in your body that allow you to do many things. And the reality is like, if you want the same level of control, you need to interface with the neurons at the level of like sort of matching that level of granularity and size. And that is very hard to do with surface electrodes. You kind of really have to like interweave what you're doing with like structures in the brain.
Maybe the common analogy people use to talk about this is if you sort of placed a microphone on the field inside a football stadium versus outside the football stadium, you'll get different kinds of signals about sort of what's going on in the game. Mm-hmm. If you're sort of at the level of on the field, you might hear the players talking to each other, coordinating plays, talking strategy, smashing into each other, this kind of thing. If you're outside the stadium, you might hear the big cheers, the sort of global structure of what's happening in the game, but maybe not the fine level detail of what's going on the field. And so I think it depends on what kind of information you want to get out. And for the kinds of applications Neuralink is talking about right now, we really care about very fine, precision information about how exactly do you want to move your cursor. And we don't want to do that at long time scales of like over the course of a second, maybe you want to move your cursor this way. We want to do it the instant that you think about moving your cursor. Yeah. And so for that kind of sort of play on the field kind of information, you really want to be nearby the neurons.
So in order to eliminate that lag.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it. Just the level of information quality is very different. Now, we talked about both long-term future and short-term future. I think there's probably a very compelling future for non-invasive interfaces in the future. The reality of today's technological landscape is that to get that kind of high-quality information, you have to be in the brain, right next to the neurons actually producing it.
Just to be as upfront as possible for me, not to say I'm against it 100%. I think I'm more okay with the idea of, a spinal implant, something to connect whatever nerves may be damaged or cut for those who have their severed versus like a brain implant. You tell the average person brain surgery, they're like, whoa, what are you talking about? So I could definitely see the skepticism and why others would want that another option, something that's more external. But again, as you're saying, to get that full picture to get the response without the lag and the full connection with the neurons. You have to have something inserted.
Yeah. And, to add to that, as to minimize the amount of harm to the tissue when you insert, we want these like little electrodes or what we consider like the little microphones listening to brain cells to be as small as possible. And then it's like, in order to have very small things implanted, you really want a robot doing the surgery, because like at this point, these are so much thinner than a human hair that like a surgeon would have a lot of trouble like picking them up manually. But also like this is important because a robot makes the surgery like safer, more predictable, more repeatable, faster, all of which like brings down cost. And again, is like part of the, can you do this and make it more accessible to more people? And so that's like part of what we're working on, like the implant being the product, the robot being like how we are able to predictably implant it and maximize the safety and the scalability and lower the cost.
So here we are back to the robots. So it sounds like Skynet, Terminator, all of this. So no. And again, like I said, as much of a fan as I am with technology, I think this is great. I really do. I feel blessed to be in this time of, the society we live in, to see these things coming to fruition. And as a person with a spinal cord injury, I really hope this works. I'll be definitely in the first 100 in line trying to figure out what's going on. And just to let people know, how do they sign up for the patient registry? I know Romina spoke about the show and tell. Do they have a date for that as of yet?
We do not have a date for that as of yet, but I think we'll be announcing that with United Spinal, like when that happens. All
right, cool. Sounds great. I'm going to put the link for the patient registry, but is there a link where everyone else can get it? Or do you guys have social media for Neuralink? Or, how can people start finding out about Neuralink now that you guys are coming up above the radar?
Sure thing. So the patient registry can be found at neuralink.com/patient-registry. Or you can just go to neuralink.com and it should be one of the items in the menu on the top right-hand side. And then if you want to know a little bit more about what Neuralink is doing, you can go to twitter.com/Neuralink. That's NEURALINK. And that's our Twitter page, where we actually have been recently posting sort of interesting technical things for people who are like fascinated by the technology behind what we're working on. So yeah, people can check out some of the tweets there and stay up to date with what's going on.
And if I wanted to text Elon directly about my fears of the robot apocalypse, is there a number? No way.
He's most responsive on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Actually, you might just want to tweet at him.
No, I have to say, guys, thanks so much for coming to share so much about Neuralink. Like I said, I'm very excited about it. I know a lot of my questions did come from folks I did tell I was going to have the interview. And I really do want to see what's coming out in the future. I will definitely be on the patient registry just to know what's going on. And you guys have my contact information. Any final words you guys wanted to share with those of us in the spinal cord injury community, and just, about what the plans and the hopes of Neuralink are?
So I guess, first of all, Ornella, is absolutely amazing to be on here. Thank you so much for having us. I think if I was to leave any words with the spinal cord injury community at Broad, I would just say, like, we're truly trying to build everything we're building with the voices of the community in mind, and we really want people to understand that. And if there's ever a moment where it feels like we haven't done that well, please tell us, and we'll do better, because we care deeply about getting this right.
All right. How about you, Bliss?
Yeah, I would echo those same sentiments and just reemphasize thank you for having us on the show. The questions I thought were quite interesting, and really enjoyed meeting you. And thank you very much.
Well, I'll leave you guys with a bit of advice myself. Get into your sci-fi. You got to know your anime to know what's coming. Guys, thanks so much. I really appreciate both Fouzan Alam and Ms. Chapman for joining us from Neuralink. Again, the patient registry will be in the episode notes, or you can just go to neuralink.com or check them out on Twitter. But fellas, I appreciate your time, and you have a great one.
You too. Take care.
All right, thanks, fellas.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the show. Connect with the podcast on social media. Check out our Instagram page at ramp.it.up.podcast or email us at rampituppodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.